In 2006, I sat in my first postgraduate apartment with MySpace pulled up on the TV screen. Many laborious hours went into picking the perfect Jay-Z song to greet the thousands of visitors that I was sure my well-curated page would attract. Meanwhile, in Brooklyn, Tarana Burke took to her MySpace page, albeit for a much different reason. You see, Burke wanted to unify and empower the victims of sexual assault and sexual harassment. In 2006, the MeToo movement was born. Flash forward a few years later, actress Alyssa Milano would take to her Twitter and would ask for all of her followers who had been affected by sexual assault and sexual harassment to reply to her tweet using the hashtag MeToo. That movement that Burke started over a decade prior had come to the modern day and had gone viral. All of a sudden, people were going to all different corners of social media to share their experiences with sexual assault and sexual harassment, many for the very first time. At long last, we were having a much needed conversation about sexual misconduct on a global scale. But Me Too was more than just talk. It was action as well. Serial abusers like Bill Cosby, Harvey Weinstein, and R. Kelly would all finally face justice for decades of inflicted trauma. Me Too would even make it to some of the highest offices in our country. Who can forget the iconic image of Dr. Christine Blasey Ford swearing in before the Senate to discuss her experiences with then Supreme Court hopeful Brett Kavanaugh? From 2017 to about 2019, Me Too was the brightest shining star in the social justice sky. Until one day, it wasn't. Now, don't get me wrong, Me Too still exists. You can go to the Me Too website right now and see a lot of great work that is still being done as a part of the movement. But in terms of being that viral sensation that it once was, Me Too cooled off. Now, this cooling off period is not unique to Me Too. Most social justice movements will go through it. A movement will gain popularity, and it will bask in the spotlight of being viral before we all inevitably move on. Some people will blame the 24-hour news cycle for our short attention span. A news cycle that serves us up stories so quick that it can be difficult to digest what is on our plate before the next course is being rushed from the kitchen. Others will blame social media slacktivism, which allows us to attach to any social or political ideal we want, make a bunch of posts about it, and then argue with jerks in the comment section until we move on to the next movement du jour. With a combination of the 24-hour news cycle and social media slacktivism, it is no surprise that we've been able to move from hashtag MeToo to hashtag Black Lives Matter to hashtag Mask Up to hashtag Murder Hornets, all within the span of 3 short years. But let's get back to Me Too. The stories have been shared, some convictions have been handed down. So the question is, now what? Well, now this. In the 2006 book, We Believe You, activist Brenda Tracy had a very powerful quote. In that book, Tracy said this: "Women cannot stop rape. If we could, we would have already done so by now. There are some good men out there, but not enough are speaking up, and not enough are doing their part. So, if the question is, now what? Then fellas, the answer is now us. Now we must pick up the Me Too torch and use it to illuminate our path towards sustained cultural change. Now, I already know what you're thinking. I can hear it right now. Well, Wilkerson, sustained cultural change, that sounds great. But how do we go about doing it? How do we get there? Well, this is a TEDx talk, right? Yeah, it's a TEDx talk. So you know your boy is coming with some solutions. As a matter of fact, I am coming with 3 calls of action to every man out there tonight in our live studio audience and for those watching from home. And ladies, these calls of action, they can work for you as well. We don't want anyone to feel left out. We want to be inclusive. But when 90% of the perpetrators of sexual misconduct are men, well, guys, this is one of those times where we need to take our seat at the front of the class. Call to action number 1. We must engage in meaningful self-reflection. We must look at ourselves and take an inventory of our behaviors and our beliefs to figure out whether we are part of the solution or part of the problem. Now, I get it. This part can be difficult. It can be embarrassing to look back at some of the behavior that we participated in undergrad. It can be embarrassing to look back at some of the jokes we may have laughed at in high school. Simply put, self-reflection can be painful. But in the words of Hall of Fame radio host Charlemagne the God, if you are not hurting, you're not healing. Call to action number 2. We must practice compassionate listening. What's compassionate listening? Well, compassionate listening is when your female coworker comes to you upset because a colleague has made a sexually insensitive remark, that you don't just write her off as being a snowflake, but you take the time to listen and understand the pain that that remark has caused. Compassionate listening is when a student comes to you and tells you about the misdoings of a fraternity on campus, that you don't just write it off as boys will be boys, but you take the time to understand the damage that those misdoings have caused your campus community, and you respond accordingly. Compassionate listening is when your teammate comes to you and tells you about a time that he was a victim of sexual assault or misconduct, that you don't write him off as a sissy or some other emasculating term, but that you listen to him with the same ear you would listen to your very own mother with. Call to action number 3, and probably the most important of the 3. We must hold each other accountable. Now, there's this misconception that accountability is a difficult thing. It's hard to do. Well, I'm here to tell you tonight that that's not true. Did you know that it takes about 30 seconds for you to lean over to the person you're sitting next to in the car and say, hey, stop being a creep, in response to him hanging out the window and catcalling a woman walking down the street? Did you know that it takes about 90 seconds to type, hey, that's not funny, we shouldn't joke about stuff like that, in response to an email that a colleague has sent you making a joke about rape? Did you know that it takes about 140 seconds to physically put yourself in between a party guest that can no longer give consent and your friend who may be on the verge of taking advantage of said party guest? Accountability is actions that take mere seconds to perform, but that can save us from years of trauma. Self-reflection, compassionate listening, and accountability. Fellas, this is the triforce by which we must live our lives. And if we do, we will be well on our way towards that much needed, sustained cultural change. I'll leave you with this. When MeToo was at its height, there were some men out there that got really upset. Oh, these guys, they got offended. How dare people have the audacity to share their experiences with sexual misconduct. These guys, they got up out of their chair and they stepped forward and they put their chest out there and beat on it a little bit. And they said, now wait a minute. Hold the phone with all of this MeToo man-bashing malarkey. It's not fair. It ain't right. How dare you talk bad about men? Because I don't sexually assault people. And my friend Dave over here, well, Dave doesn't sexually harass people either. And our buddy Jimmy doesn't do any of this stuff. So you just need to go ahead and pump the brakes with all of this feminist agenda male bashing. Because after all, come here, Dave, come here, Jimmy. Hashtag not all men. And if that's the philosophy that you live your life by, then to you, I say congratulations on doing the very bare minimum to be considered a decent human being. Here's the thing. The bare minimum is no longer enough. It's no longer enough to just look in the mirror and say, oh, well, I don't do any of that stuff, so sexual misconduct's not my problem. No, it is your problem. It's your problem. It's your problem. It's my problem. Sexual misconduct is a community problem. And as such, it requires a community solution. It requires us to look at ourselves and see exactly where we stand. It requires us to listen to others. And it requires us to check our friends, our family, our fraternity brothers, our classmates, our colleagues, and all those around us when they step out of line. Fellas, we must work tirelessly and intentionally until hashtag not all men turns into hashtag not any man. That's the goal. That's the destination, and that is now what? Thank you.